Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important things that we use as software engineers on a daily basis, which is a version control system. Now imagine this. You're building a coding project with a friend who lives across the world from you. When you change the code, how does your friend get the updates? Are you going to send an email every single time you make some change? That's going to get really annoying. You could also try using a file sync service, something like Dropbox. And so anytime you change a file, it automatically synchronizes to your friend's computer. This could be a good option. But what happens when you both try to edit the exact same file at the exact same time? Dropbox is actually going to break and it's going to complain that this is happening. And this is a situation where a file sync service and email is not the best option. There's a much better alternative that provides a lot more features, and it's a piece of software known as Git. It's commonly run as a command line tool, but there's a few really popular websites that have put a nice UI in front of it, notably GitHub and Bitbucket. The way Git works is that you store all of your code in a repository. Think of a repository as just a folder. You can put whatever you want inside of that folder. More folders, files, code, it doesn't matter. You can set up a free repository using either of those two websites that I mentioned earlier, and your repository can be public, meaning anyone in the world can access it and see what's inside of it, or it can be private, which means you have the option to select specifically who you want to have access to it. The big idea with Git is to think about it like an actual tree. A tree has at least one branch, which is known as the trunk, and it can have more branches or it can have none. Now, in Git, a branch is a version of code. You can have as many branches in a repository as you want, but there's always at least one, which is the trunk. Now, when you first create a repository, one branch gets automatically created, and it's usually called main. This is where you want all of your good, healthy, working, and tested code to live, because this is the most important branch in your repository. Now, whenever you want to build something new or test something out, you do that by creating a new branch, and you can do it separately without affecting your main branch. The first thing that you do is you take that repository and you clone it down to your local computer. This takes an exact copy of all the code and files in that repository and copies it down to a folder on your own computer. Now, when you and your friend want to start building out your project, let's say you want to do things a little separately. You're building a Connect 4 game while your friend is building a tic-tac-toe game. What you want to do is build two new branches from the main branch. This means that all of the code that lives in the main branch that's working and tested as far as we know gets copied to your individual branches. Then you both work separately on your own branches. Any code that you change won't affect your friend, and more importantly, it won't affect any code that lives in the main branch. As you're building out your Connect 4 game, the time comes when you're finally done. You've tested everything and it works just like you expect it. So what you do is you merge your changes back into the main branch. Then you can delete your branch, create a new one, and start working on the next feature. The first thing we gotta do is head over to github.com and register for an account. This is the website we're going to use for hosting our repository and all of our code. Once we've registered our account and logged in, we can go ahead and create our first repository. We're going to name this repository Discord bot, and we're going to make sure it's still public just so everyone can see our code. We're not going to mess with anything else, and we can go ahead and create the repository. The next thing we're going to do is head over to the Git source control management website so we can install the Git command line tool. When you go through the installation process, make sure you select the command line tool as well as the GUI. Once we have that installed, let's get our current code version into our Git repository so that we can share it with anyone else. The first thing we need to do is initialize our repository. Now what you're going to notice on the left hand side is a new .git folder gets created. This .git folder is used by the Git command line tool, and so we'll never want to touch it ourselves. The status command is going to show us what branch we're currently on, as well as any files that have been changed. All of those files you see in red are files that haven't been pushed up to our repository yet. Before we push any changes, we first need to create a commit. Now, a commit really is just a bundle of changes. So we're going to create one commit that's going to contain all of the files we've modified so far. However, there's specific things that we don't want to push to our Git repository. Any credentials or database information is not something we want in our repository because that means other people might have access to sensitive information. So when I run the git add command, I'm going to add every single file except our database, our config file, which contains our tokens, and the node modules folder because that just contains some cached libraries that we can install anytime we want by running the npm command. Now we're going to run git status again, which is going to show all of those files that I specified that we can add into a new commit. The next thing we're going to run is git commit, and this is going to take all of those files in green and add them into a bundled change or a commit. Then we're going to go and create a new branch called main. And then we're going to do some setup since we're initializing this repository from the very first time. You're going to notice I'm not actually copying that URL exactly like it is. I'm actually adding my username in front of it, which is what you're going to have to do, so that we get prompted to enter our password later on. And now we're going to go ahead and push our main branch up to our remote repository. Then we can head back over to github.com and refresh the page. We're going to see all of those files that we added to our commit that we pushed into our branch. Now that we understand the basics of Git, let's run through a quick example. In this example, we're going to want to create a new file containing all of our documentation for our project. Now the first thing we want to do is create a new branch where we can do all of our development work pertaining to this new feature that we're adding, which is our documentation. We can create a branch in one of two places. For this first example, we're going to create the branch from the GitHub UI. You want to make sure that your branch is short but very descriptive of what you're going to be doing. We're creating a new documentation feature. Since we created this branch from the GitHub website, we don't have it on our local computer yet, which you're going to see when we type in git branch. That branch doesn't show up. So what we have to use is the git fetch command, which is going to go to the GitHub repository and pull down all of the new branches that have been created, either from the UI or if anyone else has created a branch from their own computer. Now we can see our new branch. Now we want to check out that branch, which means any changes that we make in our repository from this point onwards are going to be isolated to that specific branch. And if we use git status, you'll see right there on the first line that we're currently on our feature documentation branch. Now there's a lot of different ways that we can write out documentation. We're actually going to create a really unique file called a README file. And websites like GitHub and Bitbucket actually take this file and they display it on the front page of your repository. We're going to write this file using a special language called Markdown, which is super simple, and we're not going to do too much with the documentation right now anyway. The hashtag on line 1 is just going to make Discord bot a header, which means it's going to show up in a bigger font size, which you'll see in a couple minutes. Now that we've created and edited our first file, let's run our git status command and let's see what's changed in the environment. And just like we expected, we see our README Markdown file. Let's go ahead and add that file to the current commit. And those are all the changes that we want to make for this first branch, so let's go ahead and create our commit. Once our commits are ready to go, we can go ahead and push all of our changes in our branch upstream. And as soon as we did that, you'll notice that the GitHub website already detected those changes. Let's go ahead and refresh the page and see our new file. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'll actually see that README file displayed right there on our front page. One other really important aspect of the entire software development process is something known as a code review. We want other people to look at our code, read it, and make sure that they don't find any issues with it that we might have missed. This is how we can ensure that code is up to quality and it meets everyone's standards. So to do this in Git, we're going to create something known as a pull request. You'll notice at the top that we're requesting to merge our feature documentation branch into the main branch. So I'm going to go ahead and add a quick title, add a short little description, and we're going to create our pull request. From the pull request phase, we have a really convenient interface. We can click Files Changed, and this will show every single file that has changed in our branch that's different than the main branch. And it's just that one README file that we added. You would want to add your teammates under the reviewer section, and basically that would ask them to review your code for you. Now in this case, I don't have anyone to review my code, so I'm just going to go ahead and merge the pull request. And since my code has been merged in, I can just go ahead and delete my branch. Now the only caveat of doing it from the UI is that that branch still exists on our local computer. So if we type in git branch A, we're still going to see that branch. So there's two things that we need to do. Now we need to switch back to our main branch. Now we want to do another git fetch, except we want to pass in the P flag. The -P or prune flag is basically going to say, if there is a branch that no longer exists on the GitHub server, I want it to be deleted from my local computer. And you'll notice right there that it actually deleted the feature documentation branch since it no longer exists on the GitHub server. We can validate that just by running the git branch command one more time. Now you're going to notice on the left-hand pane that README file doesn't exist in my folder yet. That's because the changes in the main branch haven't been synchronized to my local computer yet. I have to do this manually. And I'm going to do this by running git pull, which is going to pull in the latest code for my branch. And just like that, the README file appears. Now let's talk about the second way to create a branch, which is using the command line tool. For this second feature, we're going to be using another convenient feature of Git, which is the ability to ignore certain files from showing up when we use git status. This will prevent us from accidentally pushing our database or our config file that has our bot token up to our public repository. We use the checkout command, except we pass in the -b flag, which means we want to create a new branch and check it out at the same time. We're going to name this gitignore since that's the name of the file we'll be creating. If we run git status really quickly, you'll notice that git shows us those untracked files. Even though we never want to track them, we don't care if our database changes because we'll never want to push that to our repository. Let's create our special file, and the way this file works is that we put in the names of any files or folders that we want Git to ignore. Now to prove that this works, we can run git status one more time and we'll no longer see any of those files that we defined. Now let's add the file to our commit and create a commit. Since this branch only exists on our local computer, we have to pass some additional information to our git push command the first time we run it. We use git push origin, which is the remote server. Don't worry too much about what this means. And then we enter in the name of the branch. And just like that, we can refresh the GitHub website and we'll see our new branch with our new file in it as well. For the purpose of this example, we're not going to create a pull request to merge our changes into main. We're just going to do it using the command line. First, we have to check out the main branch. Then we run git merge and the name of our feature branch because we want to merge the changes from that branch into the current one, and we're currently in the main branch. Now our .gitignore file shows up again and we've successfully merged in the changes. We can go ahead and push the main branch upstream. Let's refresh the website and we'll see the updated main branch. Let's do some cleanup now and delete our old feature branch since it's no longer needed. We'll run git branch with the delete flag, which will delete the branch from my local computer, but it still exists on the GitHub server. So we need to also delete it from there, which we'll do using another push command, except this time we'll pass in the -delete flag. Our feature is now merged in and totally cleaned up. Thanks for watching, and make sure you bookmark my GitHub repository. All of my future code is going to be uploaded right here.